Today, we're going to be talking about resiliency or resilience. Resilience is very important when it comes to trauma recovery, not just to understand it, but to become it. We see resilience manifest in nature. There are plants, there are animals that can go through fierce storms and attacks on their species, but nature seems to find a way, right? So we know that it's the course of nature to survive, but for us as humans, we're given our conscious mind. So it's our ability to go beyond just surviving and to get into thriving in life. So how can we pass through this survival stage that we get locked in after trauma and get into actually thriving and reviving our life? Well, we can take a lot of lessons from Lucy Hone. Lucy Hone is a professional trauma researcher, and she researches resiliency. In fact, she was hired by a contractor for the Army to teach all of the armed forces not only how to be strong in body, but how to be strong in mind and overcome trauma. And she was just about to teach these soldiers everything she knew, and then tragedy struck. Her 12-year-old daughter got in the car with her best friend and her best friend's mom, and they were just on their way driving down the road, and a car went barreling through a stop sign and hit them, and they died on impact. Just like that, Lucy lost her 12-year-old daughter. Lucy struggled to know even who she was anymore after that. Trauma like that is very difficult to quantify. A parent losing a child is described as some of the worst trauma, some of the worst pain in terms of loss that a person can go through. Lucy found herself in the very position that's opposite of where she was. She was going to be counseling survivors, and now she herself was a grieving mother. But she decided to turn this into a little bit of an experiment and try to use the very things that she would teach others on herself to see, does this stuff really work? And so she got to work, because really the things that people in their community were telling her and that churches were telling her, it really didn't make the situation feel better. And she looked at the stages of grief, and having a pamphlet in her hand still wasn't making the situation better. But she said one of the things she realized about resilient people is that resilient people know that trauma will happen. Resilient people know that tragedy will strike. It is an inevitability. Understanding that it's a part of life allows you to be resilient before the situation even happens, because you're approaching life knowing that it's coming, and instead of living your life in fear of it, you're living your life prepared for the worst. Mindset is absolutely crucial in order to be able to survive a tragedy or to survive a loss. So if we're operating on the mindset that certain things are not supposed to happen, when they happen, our whole concept of reality falls apart. But when we operate with an adaptive mindset, understanding that tragic things can and will happen, then it allows us to be more sober-minded. Lucy says she never asked, why me? In fact, she said instead, why not me? And this was a tremendously helpful mindset, to ask, why not me? Because after all, this is happening around the world to thousands of people. What makes me so special that something bad can't happen to me? Why can't I have to go through what many other people are going through? Lucy also noticed that focusing on what you have instead of what you do not have, focusing on what you can change instead of what you cannot change, basically focusing on the plus sign, the positive, what does exist instead of what doesn't exist, is tremendously helpful. So instead of focusing on what she's lost, she focuses on what she has. She still had two young boys that she had to raise. And those young boys are relying on her and her father to be strong. They're relying on them to show the way through this tragedy, and they still deserve to have a good life, despite the fact that this tragedy happened. So she learned not to focus on what was lost. She learned not to focus on what she could not change, but instead she focused on what she could change, what was in her control. She focused on her purpose. She said in the army, they teach you to hunt for the good. And I guess that makes sense as a hunter, because if you're going through the tall grass or the wilderness searching for your prey, and you have a bow and arrow or you have a gun and you are going to shoot and kill, you have to focus on what you find is there, because on the horizon, there is an infinite amount of clear space. But you might have one deer, one gazelle right there that you can target. But you're not going to be a very good hunter if you look at that gazelle and you say, yeah, but it's so small as comparison to all of this empty space. Look at this huge horizon. If I shoot the arrow there, I won't hit anything. If I shoot the arrow there, I won't hit anything. That would be maladaptive, right? To focus on everything else except for your target, your aim. So we have control of the conscious mind. We have control of what we focus on. It will not be helpful for us. It will not help us to heal if we're focused on everything that we do not have, everything that we cannot hit. We have to focus on a target. What is attainable for us? And we can do this a little at a time, because changing behavior happens a little at a time often, right? So instead of saying, okay, well, I want to become the most healthy and the most healed person, we just start with small things. So if you wanted to change your behavior of flossing after every meal, just try flossing one tooth after each meal. And by setting that small goal, you see how it sets you up and it creates momentum so that you can actually develop the proper habit that you're aiming to develop. She said also she learned to ask herself this question: can this help me or does this harm me? Does this help me or does it harm me? She said, because when I'm looking at these pictures of my daughter and it's just making me cry, there comes a point where I need to stop and set the pictures down, because I ask myself, is this helping me or is this just harming me? We need to be kind to ourselves. Simply doing something because we think we should and we're ruminating over and over and over and over again, we have to ask ourselves, does ruminating on this help me or does this harm me? Because if it doesn't help, we have to switch our focus. What do you switch your focus on when you find yourself ruminating over and over and over again on something? What do you switch your focus to? Your purpose, your objective, your aim, your goal. What are you hunting for? We have to ask ourselves that question. Does this help me or does this harm me? Because making the choice between what helps us and harms us, the more we make the choice to choose what's helpful, the more adaptive our thinking is, the better our mental health is. The better our energy is, the better our emotions are. The better our emotions are, the better we feel. The better we feel, the better we think. The better we think, the better we act, right? So we have to be focused on what's going to help me. Is this helping me or harming me? And move forward towards our goal, towards our purpose, towards our aim. What is resilience? Resilience is your ability to adapt to negative change. Resilience is your ability to adapt to negative change, to overcome, to succumb, or surmount obstacles rather than to succumb to challenges. When we get a positive change, it's not so hard to be resilient, right? We can overcome a positive change. If we get a raise at work, we're fine with that. But it's when we lose that it hurts us. Why? Because often it causes a trauma. This trauma is a violation of ourself. It's pulling away from our values. It's taking something away from us that we held as dear. And if we valued it, that means in our mind, it was like it was a part of us. It was a part of ourself. That's why it's so difficult to overcome the loss of a child it's also difficult to overcome a breakup because we viewed that person as like a part of who we were. They were part of the overall abstract of what we are. To have that woman on our arm or that man in our corner, we pictured that as everything to us. But the more we have the language of I've lost everything, the more we trigger the subconscious to go into fear. So if we give ourselves the language that we've lost something that was important, but we have not lost everything, it helps the mind to rebalance the chemicals and give us what's really appropriate. So we shouldn't view wants as needs. We shouldn't view a loss as being more than what it is. And we should continue to put our focus on what we still have. So if you've gone through a breakup, focus on what you still have because your purpose has not changed. Your purpose should never have been that woman or that man. Your purpose should always have been how you were going to glorify your creator, help mankind, benefit the self, and do everything all in a way that's harmonious. That's always been your purpose. Your purpose has not changed because of the choices of another person. So if a man or a woman who used to be in your life has made a decision to move on, as sad as that is, let them go and focus on your aim, your goal, your objective. Because one of the best things that can get us over a loss is more gain. And one of the best ways to get more gain is to develop traction, accomplishments, pursuing the purpose. What creates resilience is our ability to adapt, that is to thrive in an environment that is unideal for thriving. So immediately you get punched, you get hit, you get slapped, you get something taken from you, you experience the loss. And the sooner you can snap back to, all right, well, let me get back on my purpose, the more resilient you are. Because whatever you've lost, you still have potential. It doesn't matter what your loss was. You still have potential. If you have the ability right now to listen to this presentation and you can process the thoughts that are coming in, you still have potential. The reason we do programs like this is because most of our traumas that we're trying to recover from are in the energy realm. It's not so much that we lost our arm that's messed us up or that we lost our leg. It's that we lost a part of the self. It's that there's a wounding in our soul. So how does a presentation like this help us to heal? Well, because it's the energy self that experienced the loss. These presentations give us energy. What I'm transmitting to you are thoughts, and thoughts are energy, and every thought carries a charge. It's positive energy, it's negative energy. So if it's positive, then it will build up the inner self. So you have to make sure 30 minutes a day you are on your edification. You are listening to talks and presentations and reading books and scripture. You are adding to the self to build up the metaphysical self, to build up the energy self, to be the ultimate version of you so that you're thinking in the higher mind. When you add all of these positive thoughts, you're adding positive energy. You're building up. You have the building blocks for the ultimate metaphysical self so that you're operating in the wise mind, the higher self, because you were made to be more than just this flesh and blood, this physical body. This is sort of like most people describe their physical body as being almost like an avatar, a vessel that they're guiding, that they're using, and it's a blessing. But you are a conscious being. You, the thoughts, are existing in energy form. So you have to be on top of your edification, because that's like your nutrition. It's like eating the food that your body needs, because your body is literally made up of the food that you eat. You, the metaphysical self, are made up of the information you take in. So it's not going to help us to take in information that's not helpful, but instead is harmful, right? So watch how much you're watching the news, because some of that information is not helpful. It gets to the point where it's harmful, right? The news media has one job. Their job is to gain viewers so that they can sell advertising space. That's the news media's job. Do not be naive. Their job is not to report the news. It's to gain viewers. They've found through their research that more people will watch if they tell you the world is ending, if they sell catastrophe and tragedy. It can be helpful to a degree to pay attention to what's going on, but limit it. Because remember, they have to keep this going day after day after day after day. Somebody's paying the bills and it's their advertisers. So they got to keep you engaged. So they have to keep coming up with new, exciting tragedies. But this is terrible for the energy self, because what are you taking in? You're taking in negative energy. It's pulling you down. Limit your news consumption. What about your pop music? All right, the bubblegum pop. I don't want to name any artists right now, but I'm thinking of certain top selling artists that make music that sounds so great, but it does nothing for the inner person. It does nothing for your mind, nothing for the soul. You know, things that are focusing on relationships, sexuality, materialism, all these things, it does nothing for the inner person. So limit your pop music. Limit it. Make sure that when you're in the gym, instead of feeling like you have to listen to these pop songs, make sure you're pouring in the edification so you can build up your mind while you're building up your body, so you can be the higher self, the ultimate self. All of this is a part of healing, excelling. The same things we do to heal a muscle is the same things we do to get stronger, even if there was no injury, right? What you're basically doing in the gym, even with no injury, is like physical therapy. So build yourself up stronger by being careful what you listen to. That's your edification. What's the opposite of resilience? Rigidity, fragility, weakness. So many people, after they experience a trauma, after they experience a loss, they decide, I need to live the rest of my life in fear. Just like that. They come up with an idea, wow, this was really bad. How do I protect myself from this? Well, I have to live the rest of my life in fear. And so they curl up in a ball and they start limiting themselves. I can't go there because that triggers me. I can't do that. I'm afraid of that now. I can't do that. I can't talk to them. I can't go there. And they limit. They can't go get a new job. They can't change houses. They can't grow. They can't go out. They start staying in their house. And it just gets more and more limiting. As you limit yourself with fear, everything starts to shut down. You cannot become smarter when you live in fear, because you're shutting down your mind. So your mind cannot grow. Your system's getting flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. It becomes toxic when it goes beyond 15%. That becomes toxic to the system. So now you're gaining weight. The heart starts to shut down. The cardiovascular health is bad. So you're getting physical health problems. Your immune system suffers. It makes it difficult for your body to heal from illness. So when one person would get sick, you get the same thing and you're even more sick than they are. It makes it difficult for your body to heal from surgery because you're living your life in fear. So everything starts to compound. Everything starts to get worse. And then just to get some relief, you become so desperate that you start to use chemical substances. You start to abuse drugs, alcohol. And then that impairs your thinking function. So then you do things where you put yourself into danger. And what happens? You get traumatized again. You get used and abused again. All because you decided to live your life in fear. You said, I'm going to live small. I'm not going to be resilient. I'm going to be rigid. I'm going to make myself very small. I don't want this to ever happen to me again. I have to keep myself safe. And all of that actually gets you traumatized again and again and again. Even when there's nothing bad happening to you in the energy realm, you're rehearsing all of the bad things that did happen and rehearsing all of the bad things that can happen. And that's how you live. So you're constantly being traumatized, even by your own mind. But what if you were to choose to be resilient? Well, being resilient is doing the very thing that a fear-based person doesn't want to do, and that's making themselves vulnerable again. That's what resilience means. Because you want to be resilient, you want to be courageous, but there is no courage without vulnerability, is there? You cannot think of a single instance where someone displayed courage, but they did not make themselves vulnerable. So am I saying the only way to be courageous is to expose yourself to some risk? Yes. The only path to healing, the only path to being a resilient, courageous person is to reach out, is to grow, is to stretch out again. Even though there's a potential that something could go wrong, the only potential something can go right is if you're reaching out, you're stretching out again, is if you're making yourself vulnerable again. The only chance for a reward is if you take a risk again. The tragedy of life is it's a cycle. It will happen. And it's random. We don't know where it's going to fall, who it's going to fall on. The tragedy bus makes random stops at random times. It doesn't follow a schedule window, and it drops off a box of crud at your door, and you weren't expecting it. But since it's indiscriminate, it's going to happen to someone who lives their life in fear, and it's going to happen to someone who lives their life according to love and dreams. So what do you want to be in the in-between time? How would you like to be in between the tragedy? Do you want to be in fear, in constant trauma, worried constantly about the next trauma that's going to happen? And so let's say there's 2 years in between the next bad thing. You want to spend the whole 2 years worried, traumatizing yourself mentally? Or would you like to open it up to experience love, connection, endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin, to let all of the good rain down upon you, to enjoy life again, to grow, to progress, to obtain your goals? You can grow. You're made to grow. That's how everything in nature is. It's made to grow. I bought an onion from the supermarket. I had a bunch of onions and I used some of them, but this one onion, for whatever reason, it just got neglected. I just left it alone on the counter. And I have to be honest, I left it out for maybe 2 weeks, maybe a little more. And I needed to cook something. So I go over and I grab the onion. I got freaked out. It wasn't rotten at all. It just had a little sprout growing from it. And I'm just like, ew, like that's so weird. Like this thing that I bought, it's just supposed to be a spice, right? I sit it on my counter. It needs to just stay that. It just needs to stay a spice. But then I pick it up and now something's growing from it. But I mean, what's growing from it, it was green. So it wasn't like, anything bad, but still, it's like, it was a little weird for me. I mean, I'm a city kid. I didn't grow up on a farm, right? So I don't want the stuff that I buy in the supermarket to start growing into anything. But then I thought about it for a second. I thought, boy, nature is really interesting. And it's funny how perspective plays into this, because I'm looking at this as gross. But a person that was a farmer, for instance, would rejoice to see this bulb growing and sprouting into a plant. I thought about it and said, I guess an onion, a bulb, it's almost like a seed. So I think I'm just going to let this play out and see what happens. And so I left it on my counter. I went and bought some more onions and I used those for my food. And I just left this one onion. And in time, the sprout started to grow more and more. It started to stretch toward the light of the window in my kitchen. I thought, wow, that thing is really growing. It's getting big. But again, I kind of found myself freaked out. Like, how is this thing growing? What is it eating? What is making this? And I thought about the science behind it and like, okay, I guess cells multiply. But this is so weird because I eat onions and this is a life form. It really was something. But again, I had to switch my perspective. There's something really also beautiful about what's happening here. And this onion, a green plant is growing out of it and it's stretching toward the light. So I started to feel responsible now for this plant. I could see it was going toward the window. So I opened the blinds and I pushed the plant closer to the window, and I took a lid to a container and I just put a little water in it and put the lid under the onion where the roots would start to grow out. And I left it and I came back, and over time this thing is just getting bigger. And I thought to myself, what am I going to get more onions? Like, I just want to know, where is this really going? And yes, it is beautiful. It is beautiful. The metamorphosis, the growth. You want to see it? I put it in a tuna can. This onion has grown to be 20 inches. And I realized I cut one of these leaves and I smelled it and I put it on my tongue. It's shallots. Same thing we used to use in South America to season our food. Shallots. Now I have more seasoning and more spice. And I was wondering what lesson nature was going to teach me if I let this onion just grow and become what it was going to become. And I realized it taught me a lesson in resilience. You see, because that plant grew under unideal circumstances. There was no soil. It was not outside. It was on the kitchen counter of a single man who had no desire to raise a plant. But it found a way. And as it started to stretch toward the light, it really took a risk to grow like that. But the universe found a way of sort of helping it out through me, right? Because as I saw it was stretching toward the light, that inspired me to push it so that it would get closer to the window and get more of what it needed. And isn't that the case in life? It's only when we have the bravery to reach out, to stretch out, to ask for what we want, that we can hope to have the chance to get what we deserve. And then I start giving it water, transferred it from that lid to a tuna can. Now I'm going to have to get a pot and soil and just let this thing go. I feel responsible for it. It's a living organism. But we learn from nature, don't we? When I cut the I don't know what to call it. It's a grass, I guess. But when I cut the leaf for the green part, and I found out it was a shallot, it gave all new meaning to the plant. That's how life is. Because when we ask the question, well, what's the meaning of life? We're really asking the wrong question, aren't we? The question is, what will give our life meaning? It's not what is the purpose of life. It's how can we use our life for a purpose? What will be the purpose of your life? What will be your purpose? You have to choose it. Just as I will choose whether I will let this just be a house plant or if I will actually use it to season up my food, because now I have enough shallots to season up 2 weeks worth of home cooking from this onion. And it will be more than that if I let it grow into its potential, into what it can become. And so that's how purpose is. You have to make a choice as to what your purpose will be. You have to add meaning to your life. You have to pursue purpose. We should only allow thoughts that are going to be helpful to the self, helpful towards our goal, helpful towards our purpose. Allowing thoughts, whether they're coming from your subconscious or they're coming from your mom or dad or a boyfriend, allowing those thoughts to influence you, that's not the way. Allow the conscious mind, the higher self, to decide, is this helpful or is this harmful to me? I've been verbally abused. I get criticized by people, and there's some constructive criticism which can be good, right? Because we can handle about 15% constructive criticism, but 85%, 90% of our thoughts needs to be on what is positive, what is upbuilding. So we have to focus our minds on our glorious future and on the things we have, not what we lack. So when a person's going on too long with their criticisms of me, I find myself thinking about how terribly mistaken they are. how they don't really know me or understand me, how they're stuck behind their own perception, how what they're saying is more of a reflection of their own intelligence than it is of what I lack. And that helps me to block out their verbal abuse and to be able to move on in the power of my conscious mind, because I don't want to just be what I am. I'm trying to be something more. And I can't become more if I'm allowing negative thoughts, negative energy to detract from my concept of myself. I need to become the best version of myself that I can be. And who you are is not something you find by looking back in your past. It's something you design by looking into your future. Who you are is who you decide to be. Resilience is going through the situation that you've gone through and finding a way to flip that tragedy into a triumph. Use that stumbling block as a stepping stone, a launching pad to jump off of. Because here's the truth about resilience. There is no resilience without loss. There is no resilience without tragedy. There is no resilience without trauma. You cannot point to a man that has experienced no loss, no trauma, no tragedy, and say that man is resilient. How do you know? The only way to be resilient, the only way to manifest resilience is to go through the trauma, is to go through the tragedy, and then to decide, I will not make myself small because of this. I will choose to love again. I will choose to trust again. I will choose to live again. That is the only course to resilience. You are not a resilient person if you've never gone through anything. So if you want to be a resilient person and you happen to be a trauma survivor, congratulations. You're halfway there. So instead of thinking to ourselves, how can I prevent bad things from happening? We should ask ourselves, how will I respond when they do happen? Instead of thinking to ourselves, how can I prevent myself from getting triggered again? We have to ask ourselves, how will I respond the next time I am triggered? Because every situation, when we go through it, we feel like we didn't handle it the right way that time. Learn from it. When we decide, oh, I'm just going to get small now and I don't want this to ever happen to me again, you can't learn, you can't grow. But when you say, you know what? I need to figure out how to overcome this so this never happens to me again. Now you're thinking in terms of growth. Now you're thinking in terms of learning, and you will actually become immune. We will learn, we will be like nature. The way ants become immune, they can become immune to poison. You use a poison on them, you might kill some, but they go back and they develop a social immunity so that the next tribe of ants comes back at you and you're trying the same poison and it's not working. That's what can happen to us if we diffuse the triggers, if we go back and we say, now, how will I be able to overcome this trigger next time? So then the next time that abuser comes at us and they throw that trigger, but we're immune to it. We're like, oh, I got you. I know just what you got for me today, and I'm not going to fall for it this time. That's a good feeling because that's growth. So let us choose resilience so that we can come back immune. Let us be like my onion and stretch toward the light rather than cower in the darkness.